Exercise 7.1 is a good exercise to get started breaking down Java application into multiple files and defining classes. So I've been already taking care of the boilerplate code here. We have a file e701.java defining the class e701. The purpose of this class will only be to hold our main method. If you read the exercise description, which I highly recommend, you're going to see that our purpose is to write a rectangle class, to define a rectangle class. Well, from this class, all we are going to do is create object or objects of the class rectangle and use their functionality. Pretty much we are going to test it, or you can see it as another programmer using the class rectangle, sorry, that we are going to define. So this is the only thing that's going to go into this particular file. The other file that I already created and populated minimally is the rectangle.java file, which is going to contain the definition of the class rectangle. So to know what you want to put into that class, refer you to the book, okay? The exercise 7.1. The first two items of the list are actually fields attribute of the class. So we are going to start by defining the attributes of our class. I see that we have two double data fields named width and height that specifies the width and height of the rectangle, and they have default value of 1. So we are going to declare them. It's good object-oriented programming practice to declare all of your attribute private. It's really rare that you will have to actually declare attributes that are public. So I refer you to forums or in-class discussion to go further as to why this is so if you are curious about it, or the textbook directly. So right now I'm just declaring two attributes, width, height, assigned 1.0, 1.0, just to be consistent with the type. I look at the second item. This time I need a string data field named color that specifies the color of a rectangle. And we are going to assume that all rectangles have the same color. And this default color is going to be white. So in Java terms, I need an attribute. So private. What is the type of the attribute? String. What is the name of the attribute? Color. Is there a default value? Yes. What is it? White. So what I wrote so far is almost mechanical. Okay, now I reread my definition to make sure I didn't miss anything. Well, the only thing I didn't take into account from the problem statement is assume that all rectangles have the same color. Well, this key phrase here is there to force you to use actually a static attribute. Difference between these attributes, these are instance variables, class attribute. These are class variables, okay? The idea is that every time you create an object of class rectangle, you will have a copy of the attribute width and height inside of this object. However, no matter how many objects of class rectangle exist, from 0 to billions, doesn't matter, you will have only one variable color, one attribute color. So it's called a class attribute because you can access it and change its value even if there are no object at all that are created. So once again, I refer you to the forum. If you're not clear about this concept, ask question is a forum. This is described in your reading assignment. The next things, item number 3 on the list is going to be a constructor. Item number 3 and 4 are going to be actually constructors. So let's see what we need in terms of constructors. First, we need a no argument constructor that creates a default rectangle. So that should be easy enough since we have already a default value assigned to all the attribute of our class. So rectangle, without the typo would be better. Public rectangle, no code. Okay, if I didn't assign here default value, I would be assigning them here in the constructor. Watch out, for width and height, I could do that. I could remove the assign 1.0 here, and I could locate them in the constructor. For this one here, I couldn't do that. Why? Because this is not something that is going to be initialized when I create an object. This is a class variable, okay? So pretty much it's going to come to existence and have its value assigned to it when the class is actually loaded in the system. So try to make sure you understand the difference between class variable and instance variable, because it affects also what you are going to decide to do when you try to initialize default value into your attributes. Okay, The constructor typically is called only when you create a new object, so that won't work for class variables. Okay, so we have our first constructor here. Was easy, doesn't do much. Now we need a constructor that creates a rectangle with specified width and height. So there we go, public. All constructors are public. All constructors have the same name as a class. All constructors do not have any return value. These are the rules you need to actually memorize by heart. Otherwise you won't know what a constructor is. And if you don't know what it is, it's difficult to write one. So we are told by the book that we need two parameters. Let's call them to start off with W and H, width and height. I'm going to open close the curly brace. And now what do I need to do? Well, I need to assign to the attribute width of this class, I need to assign the parameter W, and to the attribute height, the parameter H. And I'm done. Now, before to go any further, let me open a little parenthesis here. What would happen if those parameters were themselves named width and height? Well, I would be forced to write something like this. And as you can tell, it becomes really ambiguous whether you are talking about here the parameter or the attribute, whether you're talking about the parameter of the attribute here, here, and here. So you need to disambiguate names. When there are parameters that have the same name as attribute of your class, there is a very easy way to say, I'm talking about the width attribute of this current object. Okay, remember, by the time you call the constructor, you are building an object. So this.width mean in the current object, the object being created, inside this object there is an attribute, an instance variable width, which I'm going to assign to, and here we specify just the name of the parameter. Okay, so once again, this is specified in your textbook. I'm just reviewing a couple of things with you here, but refer back to your reading if you missed those concepts or ask questions in the forums. So we have now our two constructor, which means we are in theory capable to actually build an object of class rectangle. So let's save the definition of the class rectangle. Let's go back to our public static void main inside of class E701. So I can declare a variable R capable to hold a reference to an object of class rectangle. And I can on the fly create a new rectangle. So I can use a rectangle with default value. Let's call it R1. And I can create a rectangle referred to by the variable R2, which is going to have a specified width, let's say 3.0, and a specified height, 9.0. And there we go. At this point, I cannot do much with those rectangles. I cannot even display the value of width and height attributes inside of them because they are private. So at that point, really, I cannot extract anything from the rectangle. I cannot call any method because I didn't write them yet. I can just create the rectangle themselves. But that's okay. I'm going to just right now compile. I'm going to compile all those files. I'm going to compile e701.java and rectangle.java just to make sure that the syntax is okay. Well, this is going to allow me to catch this. Cannot find symbol. Symbol width, W-I-D-T-H. And this is occurring when I refer to it in the constructor. So I go back to my class rectangle. And this is where I'm using that field. The spelling is right on line 16. So I go back to the declaration. And this is where there was a little glitch. Okay. So line 4 is where I actually have to correct that error. I save my file again. Go back to the Conqueror window. Compile again. There we go. Of course, if I run it now, remember you have to specify when you try to run it the name of the class that contains the main method. If I run it now, well, not much is going to happen on the screen. Hopefully the object were created. Okay, so I tested that the syntax was okay in both of my files. I tested that I could actually create those objects. Now, whether they are correctly created, whether I can use the method of the class rectangle, well, I will have to test that further as I define further the class rectangle. So let's have a look at what is requested of us to implement further in this class. We are going to have to define accessor and mutator method for all three data fields. So these are our three data field attributes, okay? And we're going to do a get and set method for each of them. So let's start with the width and the height. Public, we're going to start by the get method. So they have a return value, which is, in our case, double for width, double for height, and string for color. So public double get width, no parameters needed, okay? Return the attribute width. If you don't understand why this is necessary to call the method getWidth in order to access the value of the attribute width, you need to ask questions on the forum. Okay, this is called encapsulation. This is why our attributes are private. So the same way I can get the width, I'm going to make a little series of cut and paste here. I can do the same with set. Well, actually, let me do the getters first. Height. There we go. So we have a way to get the width, we have a way to get the height, and let me follow the correct spelling syntax convention here. And now we can do the same for the setter method. The point of the setter method is not to return a value, it's to change the value of one of our attributes. So for example, for setWidth, I'm going to take a parameter which I call value, and this parameter is a new value of the attribute width. So that means inside of my method, I will say my attribute width is equal to value. You will notice that this time I don't use des.width. Why? There's no ambiguity. In this case, there's no parameter or local variable named width, so I can just go ahead and use that name. Similarly, I'm going to have here, and I'm going to do a cut and paste again. Similarly, I'm going to have a setter method, also known as a mutator method, for the field height value, and I can say the new height is equal to whatever parameter was given to me. And I'm left with public string get color. As you guess by now, all those setter and getter method, those mutators and accessors are really easy to write. Okay, actually some language even allow them to be written automatically for you. So it's really something that you're never going to encounter a strong difficulty to do. It's an automatism, okay? Returns the value of contained is the attribute color, and then when you do public void set color, I'm going to have to specify a new color, okay? And I'm going to say color equal the value that was sent to me, that was given to me as parameter. So we have a lot of code here written, but this code is relatively easy, okay? It's boilerplate code. So I'm going to save, I'm going to compile, and we're going to see if everything is in order. Okay, compilation okay. Just for the sake of it, let's run it as well. There we go. One thing I would like to go back to is here. When I mentioned the attribute color, I could have used an alternative way to write this. Okay, in width and height, like I explained already, I could have used the notation des.width. Okay, well, I explained why I didn't use it in those cases, because the parameter name is value, there's no conflict. What about here? Well, would it make sense to write something like des.color? Well, think about it. If you cannot figure it out, ask a question on the forum, okay? This would not make sense. What would make sense is to write something like rectangle.color. Okay, I'm going to leave that question open actually. If you are not sure why we cannot use des.color and we should use rectangle.color instead, well, make sure that you post this question on the forum, see if any of your peers can help you out, and if not, we are going to review that in the lecture. But the answer, once again, is in your reading assignment. Okay, so we have our boilerplate code already done for us. Now let's have a look at what are the last requirements for this exercise. We have two methods to write. GetArea, which returns the area of the rectangle. I'm going to assume it's a double. And then a method named getPerimeter, which returns the perimeter. So let me go here, public. So I want to be able to use my method from outside class, so I label it public. And the first one we're going to implement is getArea. GetArea takes no parameter. We're going to compute and return the area of our rectangle. Well, that's easy enough. width times 8, and this is it. Public double get perimeter. In that case, no parameter ever. How do you compute the perimeter of a rectangle? Return 2 times width plus 8. I could put 2.0, but by now, I mean, you should be familiar with the fact that an integer times something that's going to be a double is going to be promoted to double. So I'm returning a double value here. No problem with that. Let me save. We're going to compile to make sure we are syntactically correct. There we go. If we run, still not much happening. So let's take care of that now. Let's drop a little the class rectangle. Okay. And now I would like to be able to use those methods which I defined. So for example, I would like to be able to say system.out.println default rectangle. I'm going to display some information about our rectangle R1, the default rectangle, okay? I'm going to do another println, little typo here, println, okay? And I'm going to display all information I can get from this rectangle. The width equals, and the width is going to be equal to, well, I need to use a variable R1, which has a reference to my default rectangle, okay? The one that was created here without specific value. The dot notation allows me to use attributes or method inside of the object referred to by R1. In our case, all attributes are private, so I cannot access them like that. But all the methods that are public, well, some of them are going to allow me to get the width. For example, get width is going to do exactly that job. So I have here a way to get the width of my first rectangle. And I'm fixing here a couple of typos. Then I'm going to look into the eighth of that rectangle. So I'm going to call get eighth. And I'm trying to define my test harness here. Okay, I want something, it's not really a test harness, it's just a way to test all the features offered to me by this class. So I got the width, I got the eighth, guess what? The next step is going to be, I want the color. So what is the color of that rectangle? And of course, when I look at the output of this program, I'm going to make sure that that everything matches what has the default width, eighth, and color. Okay, so I could even automate it in this program here by just comparing the return value from get width to the default width 1, get eighth to the default eighth 1, and get color to the default color value, which is white. Instead, I'm just going to display things on the screen here, and I will leave you as an exercise to do something that is closer to a test harness in class. So we have like all information about our default rectangle. Let's do the same with our, I don't know how we're going to call it, our custom rectangle. And this time, instead of playing with R1, we're going to play with R2. And there we go. Let's save this. We can go further, but let's take it one step at a time, okay? First, is that correct Java? Compiles all right. Let's run it. Default rectangle, width eighth is 1, color is white, that's good. Width and eighth of the custom rectangle are 3 and 9, color is also white. Now let's try something else. I'm going to try the set method now. What I would like to do is display information about my rectangles, like so. Then I would like to be able to change something, set the width, set the eighth of one of them or both of them. And then I would like to be able to redisplay information. So I could cut and paste this code. Instead, let's try to make something a little cleaner. I'm going to try to encapsulate this into a method. And I'm going to call this method public static void display rectangles. Okay, so once again, this is not requested of me. This is just something I do to facilitate my job of testing all of that stuff. Okay, now what if I just call here display rectangles? What's going to happen? Well, let's save. Okay, go back to Conqueror, try to compile. All right, variable R2, unknown symbol. cannot find symbol, variable R2, R2, R1, R1, R1. Every time I use R2 and R1, the compiler tells me I cannot find the symbol. What's happening? Well, there's a problem with the scope of variable R1 and R2. These are local to the main. They don't exist outside the main. What if I make them variable of my main class? So I would have them become attribute actually. Private rectangle R1, private rectangle R2. Okay. And I'm going here to put this code that actually creates the instance outside. I'm going to put it in the main itself. Why? Because you cannot create instance like that where you declare attributes of a class. Instead, what you can do is you can declare the attribute of your class where I just moved them, line 3 and 4, so that they are visible by all of your methods. And then you can create them inside of the main or inside of your constructor, and then you can use them inside of other method. So the simple modification here should lead to the same job that we were doing before. Let's have a look and make sure we are compiling okay. Well, we are not compiling okay at all so far. So let's have a look. What is happening? Non-static variable R1 cannot be referenced from a static context. So this is one that you're going to, this is an error that you're going to increasingly encounter because of the way the textbook was structured. We used a lot of static stuff, okay? Static void main, static void display rectangle. We used to put all of our method as class methods, okay? Well, right now we are starting to learn to do classes that have instance variable and stuff like that. So we are kind of at the point where we're mixing both approaches. So here's what we can do to fix that problem. The first natural reflex would be to say, well, do I really need this to be a static method? After all, class E701 is going to execute main and is going to call display rectangles on the current object of class E701. So let's try that first. I'm saving, okay, and I'm going back to Conqueror. I'm going to clear the screen, and we're going to recompile. Didn't quite work. Okay, non-static variable R1 and R2 cannot be referenced from a static context. What is a static context? Line 9 and 8. Well, let's have a look. Back to the main. Line 9 and 8. Because I remove the static here, this method is no longer static. Because it's no longer static, I can use R1 and R2, which are not static variable. They are not class variable. So that means an object of class E701 need to exist before I can do anything. Unfortunately, because main is a static variable, I cannot do anything from within there. So let me backtrack, and I'm going to try the second approach. Well, if this doesn't work, what about I make this guy here static? To static attribute, class variable. Main is a class method. Static void display rectangle is also a method from the class. Okay, doesn't need any instance to exist. So let's go back. Conqueror. Java C. This time it's compiling. Let's see if it works. I'm going to find the Java somewhere. There we go. It still does the same job. So we didn't add any feature. We just restructured our code. Why did we restructure the code already? Well, okay, let's remember a little. We wanted to be able to set things, set attributes in R1 and R2, and just display against the rectangle as simply as this. This was the whole point of this modification, be able to display a rectangle on demand just by calling a method. So now that this feature is in place, let's test the set width, set height, set color method. So let's try with set width. I'm going to call the method setWith on, well, let's start with R1, and I'm going to set the width to 3. So I'm modifying the width of R1 so that it matches the width of R2. And I'm going to do the same here with the eighth. The value that I choose here do not really matter. What matters is that the change occurs. Okay. And last, I'm going to change the color of R1. I'm going to set it to green. Let me save. Go back to Conqueror, clear. Compile. It's compiling. Alright, good news. Execute. We have a little more messages here to peruse. Okay, so let's scroll back. we start with the default rectangle is 1, 1 white, 3, 9 white. Okay, that's all good. Then I change, so the default rectangle is now 3, 9, same as the custom rectangle. And you will notice that because I changed the color in R1, it also affected the color of R2. Why? Because color is a class attribute. It's a class variable. It's not an instance variable. So once again, if you're not clear about that, okay, this exercise gives you many pointers to guide your review of the chapter, your rereading of the chapter, and of course asking questions if you are not sure about what you missed. Okay, I'm going to show you back this code for the rectangle class, and we are pretty much done with this exercise.